Okay, we're going to go through a bad example and a good example of a Unit 8 test, hopefully to give you all a better idea of exactly what I'm looking for in terms of your test. So let's go back through the essay test directions. Again, your requirements are to write a 1 to 2 page paper, which is typed in 12-point font, double spaced, as many facts as you can to support your answer. Your topic. Overall, did Andrew Jackson's policies, such as the Indian Removal Act and Trail of Tears, have more of a positive or negative impact on the United States? Include in your argument information about the addition of land, the impact of the spread of slavery, and the impact on Native Americans. Remember, to have a great answer, you should use facts and evidence that go along with your opinion. There are no right or wrong answers to these questions, but your grade will be determined on how well your opinion is argued. And then here's your grading rubric, 20 points total. 4 different 5-point components: length of the paper, spelling, grammar, and following directions. Remember, this is a formal paper. And 5 points for your examples and evidence used in your paper. And then the stance and flow of your paper. Does it transition smoothly from paragraph to paragraph? Remember, it doesn't matter if you write positively about Jackson or negatively. You're only being graded on how well you argue your opinion. You could get 100% writing that either he did positive things or negative things. Again, it's just based on how well you can argue it. So let's start out with the not so good example, and then we'll get to the good example. Why did the Native Americans have to move 1,000 miles on the Trail of Tears? It was a negative impacted. Okay, initially, there's a spelling error right there. It should start with it was a negative impact. But this it was, I'm not exactly sure what this person writing this is referring to. It was a negative impacted because the Native Americans should not be able to move so Jackson can have their land. Jackson, and there's no period here. What I want you to notice about this first paragraph, it's all one sentence. There's only one period here. So already this is a difficult paper to read. And as we go back and look at our grading rubric, these spelling, grammar, following directions, this is going to be difficult. The stance and flow is going to be difficult because, again, this is all one massive paragraph, or massive paragraph, and only one sentence here. So let's continue on. Jackson told them. Who's the them that we're referring to? I'm assuming this is Native Americans, but you need to specifically spell this out in your paper. To only bring the things that they could carry. So the brought, I'm guessing this is supposed to be they. Again, this is where proofreading really comes in. So they brought some animals to, it should be T-O-O here. Again, there's the spelling and grammar. So they could ride, and is someone gets tired, pretty sure this is if someone gets tired, the person wouldn't get off. They would make room for them so they could ride too. Again, the wrong use of the word too. And they had to build new houses. Who had to build new houses? Are we talking about the Native Americans? Are we talking about the soldiers? Are we talking about people who lived where they were going? Are we talking about new houses on the land that the Native Americans had? I'm confused. And they had to pick their food so they could survive. And they had to pick cotton so they had things to make out of it. Pick their own food so they could survive. Is this along the trail? Picking cotton was really something that slaves did during this time frame. It really wasn't something that Native Americans necessarily did, so this is really inaccurate information here. The Native American, it should be Native Americans, should be able to stay in their homes instead of walking in the Trail of Tears because they didn't deserve to walk to Trail of Tears to find a different place to build houses for them, and they will have to build farms for their animals, and most of them got a diseased, and some of them didn't make it for 1,000 miles, and the Native Americans had a lot of land, and they had to cross the Missouri River. Jackson called the move the Indian removal. He probably didn't like the Native Americans, so he made them move anyway. Now, although this paragraph is difficult to understand from a reading perspective, there is some good information in here. It definitely talks about the 1,000-mile journey. It definitely talks about how Native Americans, some of them became diseased. It talks about the fact that they had to walk, and kind of hints at the fact that many died on the Trail of Tears. But so, I mean, there are some good thoughts here. This person has a grasp of what's going on. But again, the examples and evidence, I can only give a few points here because they're somewhat unclear and they're not 100% accurate either. Jackson made soldiers stay with them. Again, who is the them here? Be specific on who you're talking about. If Jackson made soldiers stay with the Native Americans, then write the Native Americans to make sure they didn't do anything. What does that mean? Are we talking about fighting back? Are we talking about walking itself? Again, confusing. Most of the people, when they got to the place they were going, they got divided. Not sure what this means. There was a lot of Native Americans. They had to make a lot of houses and other stuff. They had the women weave and the man build the houses. Alright, so let's take a look at our grading rubric. Length of the paper. Again, your requirement is 1 to 2 pages long, typed in 12-point font and double spaced. So when we look at this, first off, take a look. 16-point font needs to be in what? 12. So if you put it in a different font, I will be putting it in the correct font, which is 12-point, and looking. Is this a full page? No. It's about, probably 80% done. So I would give this person a 4 out of 5 for the length of their paper. Spelling, grammar, and following directions. This paper was extremely difficult to read, as you saw. In total, there are only 3 sentences. 1, 2, and there's not even a period at the end of this one. That's concerning from a spelling grammar standpoint. Numerous mistakes. In terms of following directions, pretty haphazard. I would probably give this person maybe a 2.5 for spelling, grammar, and following directions. So if we look at it this way, this person's at a 4 for length of the paper. This person's at a 2.5 for their spelling. Examples and evidence used in your paper. Now granted, we talked about especially this middle paragraph, there are some things that are being said, but it's still very, very difficult to understand. And so out of 5 points, I think this person's earned 2, because really, again, there's just such a, it leaves you with more questions than answered about what this person is trying to say. Stance and flow of the paper. Does it transition smoothly from paragraph to paragraph? I found myself continually confused the entire time while reading this, and I just thought it was very, very difficult to read and to kind of follow along with. I mentioned the lack of sentences. There were a lot of things were just kind of jumbled together, and so for stance and flow of the paper, although they did have paragraphs, and they definitely did have a stance that you could see in there. I mean, it says right in here it was a negative impact, so they've made that statement, but really outside of that, not a great job. So I'm going to say 2.5 points for that. If we add all these up, we've got 4, 6.5, 8.5, 9, 11. So 11 out of 20 points would be a 55% F. Okay, so that's our negative bad example paper. Now let's transition over to the good example and see if this one's any better. Again, just trying to give everyone an idea of what I'm looking for here and what a good paper looks like as opposed to what a not so good paper looks like. So let's take a look here. This person starts out, Andrew Jackson was an amazing president. I like this opening because right away I can tell this person's stance is that Jackson is somebody who should be supported. Though others have differing opinions, I believe President Jackson and his policies had more of a positive impact on the United States. In this paper, I will explain reasons we should celebrate Andrew Jackson, such as his leadership in a variety of areas, his help in expanding the United States, and his desire to help the common man. What I love about this, in this introductory paragraph, I clearly know this person's stance. And this person previews for me in their first paragraph. Alright, although the paragraph isn't 5 sentences, that's not as big a deal to me because they've also spelled forward what they're going to talk about: his leadership, expansion, and his desire to help the common man. What I recommend for those of you who are going to write this first paragraph, I have always said, and I learned this in my college class, write your first paragraph last. Because notice how this person talks about everything they're going to say in their paper. I would just start writing your body paragraphs first. So I'd write, maybe your 1, 2, 3 body paragraphs, and then your conclusion if you're writing a 5-paragraph essay anyway. Because once you write your body paragraphs, it's much easier to go back up to your intro and say, this is what I'm going to talk to you about. So let's continue on, see how this person did with their body paragraphs. Again, you can tell 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs makes it really organized. The intro, the conclusion, and then 3 body paragraphs are trying to prove this point about Jackson being celebrated. Jackson was a general in the American Army during the War of 1812. He won the Battle of New Orleans with only half as many men as the British. Jackson also spearheaded, meaning he started, an attack of Florida and helped us get this territory. Many people believe Jackson was an even greater general than Washington. His military leadership helped him become famous and very well respected all across the country. Jackson used this fame to get elected as our 7th president. So I love this background information. Not only is this good background information, what it also does is it ties into his leadership, which they already discussed, and it really starts to point forward toward the main theme of the paper, which is the policies that Jackson had. So it tells you how he became president, and there's background information there. I think that's helpful. Now they get into the second paragraph. During his presidency, Andrew Jackson did cause the Trail of Tears, which was terrible for Native Americans. This is a fact, okay? This is an opinion. Now, if this person were to say that the Trail of Tears itself was terrible, there are people that could argue that, and there are people that could make counter-arguments. This is a statement that is accurate because, obviously, for Native Americans, this was awful. However, this person continues, had the Indian Removal Act not happened, we wouldn't have expanded as much as a nation. I know it sounds greedy, but this greatly helped the United States to grow as a nation. What I like about this is the person, although they're making the argument that the Trail of Tears or the Indian Removal Act was a positive thing for the United States, they also concede the counter-argument. They have an idea of, listen, this might be my opinion here, but I know that there are going to be those that disagree with me. I like that this person covers both sides of it while still making their own opinion known. We wouldn't have the land and may still be having skirmishes with the Native Americans had it not been for Jackson. Yes, some of those that moved westward brought slavery with them, but don't forget these slaves would have been slaves in Southern America anyway. This statement right here ties in right with the directions, where it says include in your argument information about the addition of land, which this person talks about, how the Native Americans are losing land to Jackson and the United States, the impact on the spread of slavery. Well, that's covered all right in these sentences here. And then obviously the impact on Native Americans. So this person's touching on all these different components of what they were asked to do in the directions. But don't forget these slaves would have been slaves in Southern America anyway. With more people expanding and moving out west because of Jackson, our economy began to expand. So again, covering what we were wanting to talk about here. Next paragraph. Andrew Jackson was a good man. He was really there for the people. He was really there for the people as he believed he represented them. Now you probably could include maybe a comma or something here, just to kind of break things up, but that's a really minor thing there, and you still kind of get the idea of what's going on. So, if you have like 1 or 2 small mistakes like that, that's not really going to bother me, and it shouldn't jeopardize your grade on your paper. Many people liked Jackson because he was a, quote, common man, rather than from a rich background. He didn't favor the rich and wealthy people like many other people would have. He wanted to help the poor and the common man, rather than make the wealthy wealthier. His actions in taking down the national bank prove his commitment to the common people. So again, we go back up here to the top, and we're still talking about Andrew Jackson's policies. Now, they've already discussed the Indian Removal Act, but this person actually gets into a different policy, which was Jackson taking down the national bank and his wanting to expand the United States and the people's opportunities on how to invest. And so that definitely ties in with what the person said up here about his desire to help the common man. So I think that was a nice job of tying in what they said. Closing paragraph. It is true that Andrew Jackson had many controversial decisions as president, yet I believe his actions were overall a benefit to the United States as a whole. He was a famous war hero that the people loved, so they elected him president. He did away with things such as the National Bank because he believed it favored the wealthy. Though he did kick thousands of Native Americans off their land, this order allowed more people to spread out throughout the United States, again going right back to the main purpose of the essay. Andrew Jackson should be celebrated as one of America's best presidents. So let's take a look at grading this one. 1 to 2 pages, 12-point font, double space. As you can see, this one is already in 12-point font. This one's also double spaced already, you can tell. Is it 1 to 2 pages long? Yes, it is. So this person gets a 5 out of 5 for their length. Spelling, grammar, and following directions. Spelling and grammar, there was just really that one issue that I spoke of with the comma. Not going to mark you down for 1 or 2 small mistakes. Following direction, this person did a nice job of following all the requirements that I set forward. So 5 out of 5 for that. Examples and evidence used in the paper. I thought this person did a really nice job. Not only did they use the examples and evidence, but they also tied in what others might think differently. There were specific examples, such as the Indian Removal Act, how how slavery tied in with that, expansion. It helped our economy. They talked about the National Bank. To me, the examples and the evidence that were used were good. 5 out of 5. Stance and flow of the paper. Thought this was huge. You saw the stance at the beginning. You saw the stance throughout the paper, what the person was trying to prove. And in the last sentence, they even say how Andrew Jackson is one of America's best presidents. In terms of flowing from paragraph to paragraph, it was really easy to read, especially because in their intro paragraph, they told you, here's exactly what I'm going to talk about in my body paragraphs. So I'm going to award this person 5 points for that. So that is a 20 out of 20A. And you kind of can see the difference here between a good example and a not so good example. If you have additional questions as you're going through and writing your paper, your essay test, please come see me and I am happy to help. Good luck to everybody.